Let us cast our minds back. California, the year 1983. A young woman, Sarah Martinez, faded from the world on a Tuesday evening, bequeathing only a legacy of questions and a family fractured by grief. A mother of just 23 years, her final known act was a search for a misplaced subway ticket, and then a profound and sudden silence. Yet, in a twist that destiny itself could not have scripted, 4 decades would pass before a breakthrough in DNA would tear the veil from this cold mystery, revealing a truth more monstrous than any soul in that tranquil community dared to conceive. This is no mere chronicle of a forgotten case. It is the testament of a woman who was owed a life, a family whose hope never waned, and a justice that slumbered for 4 long decades before it finally awoke. Before we descend into the heart of this labyrinthine tale, I ask a moment of you. Inscribe the number 1 in the comments if you, too, are drawn to the shadowed world of true crime, to these cold, silent cases that, after years of slumber, are at last given a voice. And as you do, tell me from which state you bear witness to this unfolding drama. I find a certain solace in knowing from where our congregation of truth seekers has gathered. I implore you, steel yourself, for this story will seize your soul and refuse to let go. The first act, the vanishing. The summer of 1983 in Southern California was a fever dream. The heat was a tangible presence, a heavy shroud that clung to the skin, compelling all of creation to move in a languid, deliberate rhythm. Within the sprawling tapestries of Los Angeles County, life pulsed with a familiar cadence: the morning exodus to work, the laughter of children dancing in sprinklers, the ceaseless drone of traffic weaving with the cicada's hypnotic thrum. It was an era, a place, where neighbors were known by name, where children chased the setting sun on their bicycles, where a fragile sense of safety still held sway. Sarah Martinez was a part of that life, or at least she fought to be. At 23, she was a woman on the cusp of her own life, yet already the devoted mother to a precious 4-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah's path had not been one of ease, in truth. It had been a crucible of hardship. She had become a mother in her youth, and Emma's father had vanished from their lives before the child drew her first breath. A familiar, sorrowful verse. But Sarah was not one to surrender to despair. She was a warrior, possessed of a fierce resolve to carve for her daughter a future far brighter than the one she had inherited. She toiled at 2 jobs, her days a testament to her will. By morning, she was a receptionist in a downtown Los Angeles dental office, her voice a balm of sweetness and patience over the phone lines, even in the face of others' frustrations. The dentist, a Dr. Robert Chen, would later recount to the authorities that Sarah was the most steadfast employee he had ever known. She never once missed a day, he would recall, his voice faltering with a sorrow that time could not erode. Even when her own child was ill, she would find care and she would be here. That was the soul of the person she was. By night and on weekends, Sarah moved with grace through a diner named Tommy's Place, a relic of classic Americana with its crimson vinyl booths, a jukebox whispering songs from a bygone era, and coffee potent enough to stir the spirits. The patrons adored her. She held their orders in her memory, inquired after their kin, and offered a ready smile even when her feet ached with exhaustion and she was sustained by a mere 3 hours of sleep. Sarah resided in a modest apartment in a working-class enclave, the kind of building where the paint peeled like sunburnt skin and the stairs groaned under the weight of years. But the rent was a mercy, and the neighbors were a bulwark against the world. Her adjacent neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Reeves, a retired educator in her 60s, had all but enfolded Sarah and Emma into her own life. She would mind Emma when Sarah's shifts ran late, refusing any coin save for the warmth of a shared, home-cooked meal. That child was a rare spirit, Patricia would lament years hence, tears tracing paths down her weathered cheeks. She was possessed of a certain light, you see. Even when the world sought to break her, she would rise again, and she would be smiling. Emma was the sun around which Sarah's universe revolved in all sincerity. The little girl was her very firmament. The walls of Sarah's apartment were a gallery of Emma's creations, crayon masterpieces that, through a mother's loving gaze, were transformed into works of profound art. Photographs were everywhere, sacred relics capturing each fleeting milestone. Emma's first tentative steps, her inaugural day of preschool, birthday celebrations that Sarah had summoned from meager funds when groceries themselves were a struggle. In every image, Sarah's smile was a beacon of pure, unvarnished hope for the future she was forging for her daughter. Sarah's own mother, Linda Martinez, lived some 30 miles distant in Orange County. Linda, a nurse, endured grueling hospital shifts that left her spirit weary. Yet she carved out sacred time for her daughter and granddaughter whenever she could. They spoke by telephone nearly every day, their long conversations a lifeline, where they shared the tapestry of their lives, the triumphs, the trials, and the dreams that sustained them both. Sarah was my soul, Linda would confide to investigators, her voice a fragile whisper against the silence. She possessed a strength that far surpassed my own at her age. She had ambitions, true ambitions. She was attending classes at night, striving to become a paralegal. She wanted to prove to Emma that you could rise from nothing and still become a force in this world. Tuesday, the 16th of August, 1983, dawned as any other day for Sarah. She awoke at 6 in the morning, dressed and fed Emma, entrusted her to Mrs. Reeves's care, and then hurried to catch the bus for her post at the dental office. The morning passed in a familiar rhythm, fielding calls, scheduling appointments, orchestrating Dr. Chen's calendar. She took her lunch at her desk, a sandwich prepared the night before, a small act in her constant, quiet battle to conserve every dollar. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, Sarah clocked out and made her way toward the subway station. A precise window of 45 minutes was all she had to traverse the city to Tommy's place for her evening shift. The subway was her artery swifter and more economical than a car, though she held a quiet dream of one day saving enough for a reliable used vehicle. Her monthly pass was a talisman tucked within her wallet beside her diner tips and a photograph of Emma, a small portrait she would gaze upon when the weight of her world grew too heavy. The subway station that evening was a maelstrom of humanity, a torrent of commuters flowing homeward, of teenagers lost in their own boisterous worlds, of street musicians coaxing melodies from the city's weary soul. Sarah navigated the throng with a practiced grace, her purse held tight against her. She wore her diner uniform beneath a light jacket, the classic waitress attire of a white shirt and black trousers, with sensible shoes designed to endure endless hours of standing. But as Sarah approached the turnstile, the world seemed to stop. Her wallet was open in her hand, yet the subway pass was absent from its familiar sleeve. She searched again, a frantic edge to her movements, her fingers sifting through dollar bills and old receipts, exploring every hidden pocket. It was not there. The pass was gone. Now, for many, a lost subway pass is but a fleeting irritation, a minor disruption. One might purchase a new fare, perhaps murmur a complaint about the inconvenience. But for Sarah, who lived her life on the knife's edge between one paycheck and the next, every single dollar was a vital thread in the fabric of her survival. That monthly pass was a significant portion of her budget. Its loss meant conjuring money from thin air, from a well that was already dry. A witness, a young man named Kevin Brooks, who was present at the station that day, would later recall the scene for the police. She looked hunted, you know. She kept rifling through her purse, again and again, and I could see the panic starting to bloom in her eyes. She moved away from the turnstile, toward the station entrance, and just stood there, lost in the search. A maelstrom must have raged within Sarah's mind, a desperate retracing of every footstep. Had it slipped from her grasp, been abandoned to the indifferent city? The urgency was a tightening knot in her chest, the looming specter of being late, the bitter sting of the money already sacrificed for that pass, the sharp dread of failing her boss at the diner, a man whose faith in her was absolute. Another witness, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, who was awaiting her train, recollected Sarah appealing to the station attendants, asking if a lost pass had been turned in. The attendants offered little solace, Jennifer remembered. They told her, rather dismissively, to check the lost and found during its designated hours. The look on her face, it was one of utter defeat. What transpired in the moments that followed would become a ghost that haunted investigators for 4 decades. Sarah, consumed by desperation, and with time slipping through her fingers like sand, evidently resolved to search for the pass in the vicinity of the station. Perhaps she believed it had fallen on her way inside. Perhaps she clung to the hope that a kind stranger had found it and left it in plain sight. The station was alive with motion, yet it was that strange, liminal hour, just before the evening rush began its full assault. The final, verified sighting of Sarah Martinez alive was at approximately 5:15 in the evening. A transit employee, Michael Foster, saw her near the station's rear entrance, an opening that led into a desolate alleyway behind the structure. She was looking at the ground, intently, as if searching for a lost jewel. Michael would later tell the authorities. I nearly called out to ask if she needed assistance, but I was summoned away. I wish to God I had stopped. I will carry that wish to my grave. And after that moment, Sarah was gone. She did not simply disappear. She was erased from the world, as if the universe itself had blinked and she had never been. When Sarah failed to appear for her shift at Tommy's place, her manager tried to reach her at her apartment. The line remained silent. He reasoned that perhaps she had fallen ill, though it was unlike her not to call. Sarah always called. It was the very essence of her character, responsible, conscientious, a professional even in the humble setting of a diner. A chill of worry began to creep into Mrs. Reeves' heart around 11 that night. Sarah always retrieved Emma by 10:30 at the very latest, no matter the depth of her exhaustion. The elderly woman crossed the hall to Sarah's apartment and knocked upon the door. Silence answered. Using the spare key Sarah had entrusted to her for such emergencies, she let herself in. The apartment was still, a perfect tableau of the morning's routine. Emma's breakfast dishes were in the sink. Sarah's bed was neatly made. All was as it should be, except for the profound, terrifying absence of Sarah herself. Patricia's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She telephoned Linda Martinez, and the terror that laced her voice was enough to send Sarah's mother hurtling into her car for the 30-mile journey, defying every law of the road. By the stroke of midnight, Linda was at a police station, filing a missing persons report with the Los Angeles Police Department. The officer on duty was courteous, yet not unduly moved. Young women, they sometimes need a day or two away, he offered, his words meant to soothe, especially single mothers. With all the stress they endure, she will likely reappear. You do not understand, Linda insisted, her voice a tremor of primal fear and rising fury. Sarah would never, ever leave Emma. Not for a moment. Something is wrong. Something is terribly, horribly wrong. The officer consented to issue a bolo be on the lookout, but reiterated that it was likely a fleeting crisis. Most missing persons cases, he explained with clinical detachment, resolved themselves within 48 hours. People returned home. A simple explanation would surface. All would be well, except, in the encroaching darkness of this story, it would not. That first night was a vigil of shadows in Sarah's apartment, as Linda cradled Emma, weaving a fragile story for a bewildered 4-year-old who only knew that mommy was gone. How does one translate the specter of danger into the language of a child? How does one mask their own splintering terror to be a fortress for a little girl whose only question is a whisper? When is mommy coming home? Soon, my love, Linda murmured, a hollow promise against Emma's hair as the child finally surrendered to an uneasy sleep. Mommy is coming back very soon. But when the sun bled across the Wednesday morning sky with no word from Sarah, the fine cracks in Linda's hope began to splinter. Her calls became a frantic litany to co-workers, friends, and neighbors, even reaching into the estranged silence of Emma's father's family. No one had laid eyes on Sarah. No one held a single piece of the truth. A tremor of disbelief ran through Dr. Chen's voice at the dental office. She was scheduled to be here today, he uttered. This is a phantom of the Sarah we know. He recounted her plans to gather extra shifts that week, a mother's small sacrifice for her daughter's approaching birthday celebration. The manager at Tommy's place echoed the void. Sarah had never arrived the night before, nor had she called. A 23-year-old single mother, he intoned to the grim-faced officers. They do not simply dissolve into the night. A terrible thing has found her. By Thursday, the weight of the case settled upon the LAPD. It fell to Detective James Morrison, a man who had spent 2 decades charting the geography of human despair in the missing persons unit. He was a sentinel of a man, one who had stared into the abyss long enough to recognize its reflection, and the void where Sarah should be screamed of the abyss. Let us trace the ghost's path once more. Morrison's voice was low, seated across from Linda in the sterile precinct air, his notepad already a tapestry of grim details. Sarah was to take the subway from her work to the diner. She departed at 4:30 and was due at the diner by 6 in the evening. Somewhere within that chasm of time, she was erased. She misplaced her subway pass. Linda breathed, her grip on a coffee cup so fierce her knuckles bloomed white. I believe she was searching for it, and someone. The sentence remained a fragment, too monstrous to complete. Morrison gave a somber, knowing nod. He had already dispatched officers to comb the subway station, to question the ghosts of the transit system, to seek solace in any recorded image. This was 1983, an era before the all-seeing eye, where cameras were rare, their gazes often blurred or blind. Still, every shadow would be interrogated. The investigation surged into a desperate new phase. Police scoured the subway station, questioning every soul who worked within its depths, posting flyers that turned Sarah's face into a public prayer. The local news caught the scent of tragedy. Missing mother, 23-year-old vanishes after work. Sarah's image flickered across television screens, that radiant smile suspended in time, as reporters narrated her last known steps into oblivion. And so the city began to whisper back, offering fragments and phantoms. One soul thought they saw a woman of Sarah's likeness spirited into a car near the station. Another spoke of a woman's scream echoing from an alley, a cry lost in the wrong hour. Each lead was a thread that had to be followed, each consuming precious time as Sarah remained adrift in the unknown. You may ask, what tale of sorrow should follow? But I implore you, remain within this shadow, for the abyss deepens still. Linda made the soul-shattering choice to spirit Emma away to the relative sanctuary of Orange County. To remain in that apartment was to live inside a memory, to be haunted by Sarah's presence, while waiting for a telephone that refused to ring. Emma's pleas for her mommy became a daily torment, forcing Linda to invent new veils to shroud a terrifying truth. We are going to have a long visit at Grandma's house, Linda whispered to her granddaughter, her hands moving numbly through Emma's clothes and toys. Each object was a relic of a life interrupted the stuffed creatures Sarah had won at a long-ago carnival, the storybooks she read each night, the vibrant crayon worlds taped to the refrigerator door. Mrs. Reeves moved with her, a fellow ghost in the quiet apartment, the two women bound by a silence punctuated only by the fall of tears. She will return, Patricia would murmur, though the conviction in her voice frayed with each repetition. Sarah is a fighter. She will find her way back to us. 4 days after Sarah was swallowed by the city, a jogger in MacArthur Park, a mere 2 miles from the subway station, stumbled upon a discovery that transmuted a missing person case into a homicide investigation. It was in the nascent light of dawn, a ritualistic run for a man named David Chen, of no relation to Sarah's employer. He was accustomed to the park's urban tapestry, the sleeping forms on benches, the late-night revelry of youth. But on this morning, his gaze was snared by a disquieting shape near a dense thicket of bushes at the park's frayed edge. He first perceived it as a discarded heap of clothing, perhaps the forsaken possessions of a transient soul. But as he drew nearer, a cold dread coiled in the pit of his stomach. It was a purse, savagely torn open, its intimate contents strewn across the damp earth like fallen leaves. David's call to the police was immediate. When the officers arrived and began their meticulous search, they found Sarah's wallet several feet away, bled dry of its cash. Her subway pass, the very one she had been so desperately seeking, lay trampled in the dirt. Her work identification from the dental office was there, alongside personal photographs, including the cherished image of Emma she kept as a talisman. But of Sarah herself? There was not a whisper, not a trace, only the violent echo of her final moments. When Detective Morrison arrived, a familiar vice of dread tightened around his chest. The purse was a testament to a struggle, its strap ripped away, the leather scarred and brutalized. The chaotic scattering of its contents spoke of a frantic, predatory search for money. Secure every piece, Morrison commanded the crime scene technicians. I want every surface examined for a whisper of a print, and widen the search. If her life was discarded here, her body may be as well. For 3 agonizing days, MacArthur Park became a stage for a desperate pilgrimage. Police summoned canine units, while volunteers from the community and city workers who knew the park's every secret joined the search. They dredged the lake and pierced the dense foliage, probing every conceivable hiding place as news helicopters circled above, broadcasting the sprawling, heartbreaking effort to the city. Linda was a constant, tragic fixture on the park's edge, her hand a lifeline to Emma's as she watched the search for her daughter unfold. Other mothers from the neighborhood formed a silent chorus of support, bringing sustenance, offering to shield Emma from the spectacle, their presence a small bulwark against an ocean of grief. Please. Linda's plea to the unblinking eye of the camera was a raw, fractured prayer, her face etched with the anguish of 1,000 sleepless hours. If anyone has seen my daughter, if you know anything, I beg you to come forward. Sarah is a light in this world, a devoted mother. She does not deserve this darkness. Please, I just want my baby brought home." But the park yielded no more of its secrets. No body, no further evidence, no sign of Sarah beyond the desecrated purse and its scattered contents. It was as though she had been plucked from the earth and dissolved into air. Morrison's instincts, however, screamed a different story. A torn purse, stolen money, personal artifacts abandoned 2 miles from her last known location. This was not the signature of a woman in flight. This was the brutal scripture of a victim. The investigation now spiraled outward, a frantic web cast over Sarah's world, searching for any possible predator. Emma's father was located and absolved. His alibi was ironclad, his shock at her disappearance profound and genuine. Co-workers from both of her jobs were placed under the microscope. So too were neighbors, friends, acquaintances, and even the familiar faces she served at the diner. Did Sarah have any enemies? Morrison asked Linda in the quiet theater of another interview. Was there anyone who carried a darkness for her? No, Linda's voice was a bastion of certainty. Sarah did not have enemies. She was a vessel of kindness. She gave her light to everyone, even to those who did not deserve it. And what of the heart's affairs? Was there a whisper of romance in her life? Linda's head moved in a slow, sorrowful arc. She had no season for such things. Her world was a universe of two, her work and Emma. She spoke of a someday, a distant shore where love might wait. Once Emma was grown, and the ground beneath her was more solid, but her voice fractured, a mirror to her breaking heart. Her entire being was a prayer for Emma's future. The detectives then turned their gaze to the faceless terror of a random act. The path from the subway's maw to MacArthur Park led Sarah through neighborhoods that held their breath after dark. In 1983, the arteries of Los Angeles were hardening with rising crime, with the shadows of gangs and the specter of addiction. Could Sarah have simply been a soul who stepped into the wrong current at the wrong time? They dredged the city's ledgers of sin robberies, assaults, any tremor of violence that might echo Sarah's vanishing. A pattern of predation emerged, muggings near that very station in the preceding months. Women, in particular, had spoken of being stalked, of a presence in the dark. Yet, no thread led directly to Sarah's fate. The forensic verdict on the purse and wallet returned as a hollow echo, a multitude of fingerprints, but the vast majority belonged to Sarah herself. Others were but smudged ghosts, partial specters, insufficient to summon a name from the system. One must remember, this was 1983. The science of DNA was but an infant, databases were provincial, and the tools of justice were crude compared to the light we wield today. "We are in want of a miracle," Morrison confessed to his partner, Detective Robert Hayes, after weeks had bled into a desert of dead ends. "We need a voice to cry out from the wilderness, or we need to find her. Because without a body to mourn, or a witness to testify, this story is fading to black with alarming speed." Touch that subscribe button if you feel compelled to follow such tales into the shadows, for I assure you, we are only at the threshold of this labyrinthine journey. The public's gaze, a fleeting and fickle thing, began to drift after a few weeks. New stories bled across the headlines, new tragedies demanded their portion of grief. Sarah's face became a ghost on the evening news, then vanished. The search parties dissolved like mist. Life, as is its cruel, relentless nature, marched on even as one family remained frozen in the amber of a waking nightmare. But Linda refused to surrender to the silence. She conjured and scattered thousands of flyers, each a paper prayer bearing Sarah's image. She besieged the police with daily calls, seeking a single drop of news in a drought of information. She made a weekly pilgrimage to the subway station, a vigil of hope that a forgotten memory might finally surface in a stranger's mind. She even summoned a private investigator, a cost that bled her savings dry, all for the desperate chance that he might find the answers the law could not. Emma was growing in the shadow of her mother's absence, a reality that was a constant, crushing weight. The night would bring the child's tears, and a question that pierced the darkness. When is Mommy coming home? A question Linda no longer knew how to answer. How long could the promise of soon sustain a child's heart before it collapsed into the abyss of never? Mrs. Reeves, channeling her agony into purpose, forged a fellowship for the families of the lost, a sanctuary for those who understood that singular, private hell, the not knowing, that is the deepest circle of torment. She would confide at their gatherings. If the worst has happened, you can at least begin the ritual of grief and, in time, find a scar where the wound once was. But this purgatory, it has no end. 6 months after Sarah was swallowed by the city, Detective Morrison was compelled to turn his attention to fresher sorrows. The decision was a poison he had to swallow. Every detective carries a ghost in their ledger, and Sarah Martinez was his. But resources were finite, and the well of active leads had run completely dry. The case was not closed, but Entombed moved to the cold case files, joining hundreds of other unsolved elegies gathering dust in the city's archives. "I will carry this forward whenever I can," Morrison vowed to Linda in their final, formal meeting. "I will not let Sarah's name be forgotten. I give you my word." Linda saw the truth of his oath in the frustrated sorrow of his eyes, and she believed him, but his conviction, however sincere, could not alter the devastating architecture of her reality. Her daughter had vanished from the earth, and no one could say why or how or whose hand was responsible. The first anniversary of Sarah's disappearance was a symphony of agony. Linda orchestrated a candlelight vigil in MacArthur Park, the very ground that had yielded the last trace of her daughter. Some 50 souls gathered, a constellation of family, friends, and even strangers whose hearts had been touched by the story. They formed a circle of light against the encroaching dark, their voices sharing memories of Sarah. "She crafted the most heavenly pancakes," a co-worker from the diner recalled, a smile wrestling with her tears. "On quiet mornings, she'd make a surplus, sharing them with us in the kitchen. She always said food held more flavor when shared among friends. She was the one who guided my son through his numbers," a neighbor's voice added. "She possessed a gift for mathematics, and she would sit with him at her kitchen table, a monument of patience, never letting him feel small when a concept eluded him." Dr. Chen from the dental office also spoke, his voice thick with a gravitas of loss. "Sarah was destined for something remarkable. Her mind was so sharp, her spirit so unwavering. She would have been an exceptional paralegal, and from there, I have no doubt, a formidable lawyer. The world itself was diminished when we lost her." Emma, now a girl of 5 years, stood beside Linda, clutching a teddy bear like a shield. She could not grasp the ceremony's true meaning, could not comprehend that this gathering of lights was an admission that her mother might be lost to the stars forever. In the innocent kingdom of her mind, Mommy was simply on a journey that was taking a very, very long time. As the candle flames danced against the deepening twilight and memories hung in the air like incense, Linda made a silent covenant. She would never cease her search, never silence her question, never surrender the fight for her daughter, even if it consumed the remainder of her days. But what Linda could not know, what no one could possibly fathom, was that the truth of Sarah Martinez's fate was a thing of far greater darkness than their worst imaginings, and it would lie dormant for 4 decades, awaiting advances in technology that were the stuff of science fiction in 1983, and a new generation of investigators to finally peel back the veil. The vanishing of Sarah Martinez in the summer of 1983 was no mere random tragedy. It was a calculated act of violence that would, in time, unmask a predator who walked in the daylight, cloaked in a life of absolute normalcy, while harboring a secret of unspeakable horror. And when that secret was finally dragged into the light, 40 years later, it would shatter the very foundations of a community that believed it knew the faces of its monsters. Act 2. The Long Silence. The years that followed Sarah Martinez's vanishing were a brutal, slow erosion for those who bore her memory. Time possesses this perverse momentum, pulling the world forward even when your own soul is shipwrecked on the worst day of your life. For Linda, every one of Emma's birthdays was a fresh wound, a stark reminder of the guest of honor who was not there. Every Mother's Day was a blade twisting in her heart. Every Christmas morning, as Emma tore the paper from her presents, Linda would see the ghosts of gifts Sarah would have chosen, imagining the light in her daughter's eyes as she watched Emma's joy. Emma grew up with a myth for a mother. Her memories were but ethereal fragments, the scent of a forgotten perfume, the echo of a laugh, the phantom feeling of a safe embrace. But as the years spun on, these faded into watercolor impressions, replaced by the stories Linda recited like scripture, and by photographs she would stare at, trying to burn into her mind a face she could barely recall. "Tell me of my mother again," Emma would plead, the request becoming more urgent in those turbulent teenage years, when the absence of a mother feels like a hollow chamber in your own chest. And Linda would oblige, time and again. She would speak of Sarah's fierce resolve, her boundless kindness, her blueprint for the future. She would speak of a love for Emma so vast it was the sun around which Sarah's entire world revolved. And she would speak of the profound injustice of a life cut short, a future stolen from the loom of fate. By 1985, 2 years after Sarah had been erased, the case was not merely cold, it was frozen solid. Detective Morrison had taken his leave, and the few who came after him, glancing at the file, found no new paths into the frozen wilderness. The physical evidence was a pittance that violated purse, the scattered artifacts of a life, a few illegible fingerprints. Without a body, without a voice from the past, without a single thread to pull, there was nowhere left to go. Yet Linda continued her crusade. She reached out to every cold case specialist she could unearth, appeared on local news segments that marked the grim anniversaries, and penned letters to national crime programs, praying they would adopt Sarah's cause. A few expressed a passing interest, but ultimately declined without more dramatic clues or a tangible lead. Sarah's story was but one among thousands of silent, unsolved disappearances. The private investigator Linda had sacrificed her savings, worked the case for 3 long years, before he had to gently concede defeat. "I am so sorry," he told her, the regret in his voice a genuine, heavy thing. "I have spoken with every soul connected to Sarah, pursued every phantom tip, cross-referenced every database available to me. Without new light, there are no more shadows for me to search. But the file will remain open on my desk. Should anything ever break the surface, I will be on it in a heartbeat." For Linda, the wellspring of her finances had run dry. She could no longer afford the hunt. Her savings had vanished into the ether, and she now walked the hospital halls through double shifts, a tireless vigil to shelter Emma and preserve their home. The weight of it all was a crushing gravity. Yet she would have made a palace of a cardboard box if it promised an answer to the riddle of Sarah. Mrs. Reeves, a relic of Sarah's past life next door, became a surrogate grandmother, a steady lighthouse in Emma's turbulent sea. She was the one who filled the void at school events when Linda's duty called, a constant presence in a world defined by absence. But time is a cruel sculptor. Patricia was aging, battling her own frailties, and the shadow of Sarah's vanishing had etched deep lines upon her soul as well. "There are days when the reality of her absence feels like a fiction," Patricia confessed to Linda one evening, the steam from their coffee cups rising like spirits. "I still listen for her knock, you see, as if this entire nightmare was but a dreadful misstep, and she, having been lost, has at last found the path home." "I know," Linda breathed, a whisper of sound. "That is the landscape of my dreams." She simply materializes in the doorway, her face a portrait of apology for the worry she caused, and the fractured world knits itself whole again. And then, I wake. The community, as is its nature, healed and moved forward. New lives bloomed in the rooms of Sarah's old apartment building. The diner where she'd served coffee and smiles shuttered its windows, reborn as a soulless dry cleaner. Life, in its relentless march, evolved, and the memory of the beautiful young mother who had dissolved into the summer of '83 began to fade like an old photograph. But a memory held in the heart does not so easily forget. In 1990, 7 long years after the silence fell, a construction crew, carving a new future from the earth, some 5 miles from MacArthur Park, stumbled upon a secret from the past. Their heavy machinery, indifferent and powerful, scraped against the earth and revealed what could only be the last vestiges of a human life, tucked away in a shallow, unhallowed grave. The site was immediately sealed, a wound in the earth bound by yellow tape. Forensic anthropologists were summoned, their task to delicately unearth and decipher the story the bones had to tell. They were old, these bones, weathered by time and wrapped in the tattered remains of a tarp, a final, undignified shroud. It was a clear and brutal narrative of homicide, for no one buries themselves. Then came the telephone call, the one Linda had rehearsed in her nightmares for 7 agonizing years. "Mrs. Martinez, we have discovered remains that could belong to your daughter. We need you to come down, to provide anything that might breathe a name into this silence." The drive to the station was a passage through a waking dream. After so many years adrift in the sea of not knowing, the sudden shore of an answer, even the most terrible one, was an overwhelming tide. Linda's hands trembled upon the steering wheel. She had called Patricia to watch over Emma, shielding her granddaughter from this grim pilgrimage. At the station, a detective, whose face was a stranger to her, Detective Jennifer Walsh, a fresh mind in the cold archives, laid out the stark reality. The remains are of a female within the approximate age. We are exhausting every avenue, dental records, anything to find a match. But Mrs. Martinez, I must prepare you, even if this is Sarah, she has been part of the earth for a long time. The story of what happened may remain untold. Linda nodded, the tears already a silent, streaming testament to her grief. I only need to know. I need to bring my child home. But after weeks steeped in the cold science of forensics, the news that arrived was a different kind of devastation. The remains were not Sarah's. The dental records were a stranger's story. The height was a mismatch, and DNA analysis, a fledgling science in 1990, delivered the final, confirmed negation. It was not her. I am so profoundly sorry, Detective Walsh said, the words carrying the weight of genuine empathy. But Mrs. Martinez, we will use this. This will be the catalyst to reopen Sarah's case, to see it with new eyes. Perhaps we overlooked a detail. Perhaps with the tools of today, we can find what was hidden 7 years past. Linda was torn asunder, caught between a wave of relief and the undertow of despair. Relief that Sarah had not met such a desolate end. Despair that she was once again lost in that terrible, suffocating limbo of uncertainty. Detective Walsh became the new guardian of Sarah's memory, a champion for her cause, even as dozens of other cold files cried out for her attention. She was young, fueled by an idealism that believed every puzzle had a solution, if one only possessed the will to find it. She spent her nights lost in the original files, a scholar of sorrow, searching for a single, overlooked word. The purse discovered in MacArthur Park, Walsh mused to her partner one day. It was found 2 miles from the subway. What journey did it take? Was it carried? Driven? Was Sarah herself brought to that place? Could have been cast from a moving car, her partner offered, a simple theory for a complex void. A robbery gone wrong, a moment of panic, the evidence tossed away like refuse. But where then is Sarah? Why abandon the purse but secret away the person? The logic of it unravels. Nothing about the case held its shape. Every theory was a ghost, riddled with holes. Every path led only deeper into the wilderness. Post your judgment in the comments if you believe justice was rendered, but stay your verdict, for the final act of this tragedy has not yet been written. As the 1990s marched on, the science of justice was reborn. DNA analysis grew from infancy to a formidable power. Databases swelled with information, and the cold case units began to emerge from the shadows, granted new resources and a renewed sense of purpose. The flickering light of television, through shows like Unsolved Mysteries and later Cold Case Files, cast a national spotlight on these forgotten stories, sometimes coaxing new truths from the darkness. Linda offered Sarah's story to every producer who would listen. In 1995, Unsolved Mysteries finally answered the call, agreeing to weave Sarah's disappearance into the fabric of their broadcast. The show resurrected her last known moments, gave voice to Linda and Detective Walsh, and opened a line of hope for anyone with a fragment of the truth. The segment aired on a Wednesday evening. Linda watched it with Emma, now 16 years old, a young woman on the cusp of understanding the full, terrible weight of what had been stolen from her. She had blossomed into a haunting reflection of her mother, the same cascade of dark hair, the same warmth in her eyes, the same unyielding strength in the set of her jaw. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become, Linda told her granddaughter, her hand a firm anchor as they watched Sarah's ghost dance across the national stage. Do you truly think so? Emma asked, her voice a small, fragile thing beneath the armor of her teenage years. I know it, my love. You are the embodiment of every dream she ever had for you. The broadcast unleashed a torrent of calls to the tip line. Most were echoes in the void, mistaken sightings in distant cities, cruel phantoms seeking attention, the well-intentioned whose memories had been warped by the passage of 12 years. Yet, investigators pursued every single thread, praying that one might lead them out of the maze. One call, however, distinguished itself from the clamor. An elderly woman from Long Beach, her voice frail, claimed her husband, now deceased, had unburdened his soul on his deathbed, confessing to the destruction of a girl at a subway station in the early 1980s. Detective Walsh herself drove out to hear this final, whispered testament. The widow resided in a nursing home, a woman in her 70s, her memory a flickering candle, yet she was adamant about the chilling words her husband had spoken. He said he'd done a terrible thing in his drink. He said he had hurt someone, a transgression for which he could never be forgiven. A fragile hope flickered within Walsh. Did he offer any details? A name, perhaps? A date etched in his memory? With a slow, sorrowful shake of her head, the woman answered. His mind was a storm, lost in the fog of his final moments. He only whispered, I'm sorry, a broken refrain. But he spoke of a subway station. And when I saw your program about the girl, Sarah, I dared to wonder. Weeks bled into an eternity as they unspooled the dead man's life. A Ghost in Los Angeles, circa 1983, his history, a tapestry of spirits and petty crimes. But as investigators delved into the shadows of his past, the narrative fractured. Iron bars had held him captive for a DUI on the very day Sarah vanished. The deathbed whisper, that phantom confession, was never meant for her. Thus, another door slammed shut. Another tide of hope receded, leaving only the wreckage of disappointment. I am so sorry, Walsh confessed to Linda, the words heavy with the weight of the exhausted lead. For a moment, I truly believed we held a key. It's all right, Linda offered, a brave lie that could not mask the truth in her eyes. You fight for her. That is a grace most have long since forgotten. The year 1997 arrived, marking 14 years since the void of her mother's absence opened. Emma graduated, a bittersweet triumph. Linda, ever the anchor, summoned a gathering of souls who had weathered their long storm. Mrs. Reeves, now in her 80s, her spirit a defiant flame, the kindred spirits from Linda's circle of grief. Even echoes of Sarah's life from the dental office appeared. Your mother, she would be incandescent with pride, Dr. Chen confided in Emma, his own years, now written on his face. She spoke of your tomorrow as if it were a sacred text. Her dreams for you were boundless. A smile touched Emma's lips, but it could not reach the sorrow dwelling in her gaze, a truth Linda knew intimately. Each milestone was a coin with two faces, one of joy, the other of profound loss. A graduation, a first love, each a ceremony haunted by the ghost of the one who should have been there. Do you suppose she watches over me? Emma whispered into the quiet that followed the party's end. Can she see me now, from that place beyond our sight? Linda gathered her granddaughter into an embrace, a shield against the night. I must believe it, my love. I must believe that Sarah sees the magnificent woman you have become, the mountains you have moved, and I must hold to the faith that one day the silence will break. We will have our answers, and she will have her justice. Yet, as the 1990s bled into the new millennium, the dawn of justice felt not closer, but like a star receding into the infinite dark. The dossier of Sarah Martinez had grown heavy, a tome of failed paths and shattered hopes. New eyes would periodically scan its pages, but the story remained unchanged. In the cold silence of a storage facility, her earthly remnants lay in wait a violated purse, scattered fragments of a life, the faint impressions of unknown hands, all sleeping, dreaming of a future touch of science, or fate, or a long overdue miracle. In 2003, 2 decades after Sarah's vanishing, Linda once again called a vigil at MacArthur Park. Time had thinned the crowd to a sparse gathering of the faithful. The media's gaze had long since turned away. 20 years is an eon in the memory of a city, and Sarah's story had become but one verse in a sorrowful epic of the lost, a city of angels that had collected thousands of ghosts. Emma was now 24, a mirror of the age her mother was when she was stolen from the world. The symmetry of it struck Linda like a physical blow, a theft of breath. Her granddaughter was walking the path. Sarah never could a life filled with purpose as a teacher, the warmth of a love named Michael, and the quiet hope of a family yet to come. I am afraid, Emma confessed into the evening's quiet. What if that shadow follows me? What if the tragedy that took my mother is some dark inheritance, a curse woven into our blood? That is not your story to carry, my child, Linda soothed. Even as she recognized the familiar echo of that fear, the chilling whisper that lightning might seek the same tree twice. What befell your mother was an act of profound evil, not a destiny written in the stars. You must live. You must find your joy. That is the legacy Sarah would demand of you. In 2005, Detective Walsh's watch came to an end. She passed Sarah's ghost-laden file to a new guardian. On her final day, she stood before Linda. I am sorry I could not bring her home, she said, her voice etched with true regret. I swear to you, I tried. Every path, every new whisper of science, I pursued them all. I know, Linda replied, embracing the woman who, over 15 years, had become more than an officer of the law, but a fellow keeper of the flame. Thank you for never letting her memory fade. The new detective, Christopher Rodriguez, was a man drowning in the present. He was buried beneath the weight of fresh tragedies, of wounds still bleeding. Sarah's story, a relic from 1983, was ancient scripture to him, a cold case that had humbled his predecessors. His intentions were good, but Linda saw it instantly. The fire that had burned in Morrison and Walsh was absent from his eyes. The new millennium ushered in an age of scientific miracles, the power to read stories written in blood and bone, to connect ghosts through digital webs. Linda devoured every article, every tale of a cold case, resurrected by the alchemy of DNA, praying that this new magic might finally touch Sarah's silent case. Her calls to the department became a constant, desperate prayer. Could they not re-examine the evidence with these new, powerful eyes? That would require resources, Rodriguez explained, his tone weary. And to be candid, Mrs. Martinez, the artifacts we possess are few, faint smudges of prints, no biological trace of an assailant. There is precious little to ask of the science. Please, Linda implored, her voice breaking. There must be something, some new angle of light to cast upon the shadows. I beg of you, do not abandon my daughter to the darkness. He offered a hollow promise to try, but Linda heard the truth beneath the words, the sound of a door being gently closed. Sarah's case was a ghost ship, lost in a sea of thousands of fresher, more urgent tragedies. Let the record show if you foresaw the coming storm, for I assure you, not a single soul was prepared for the tempest that was about to break. In the year 2010, Emma pledged her life to Michael, a gentle soul from the world of code and light. Linda, a pillar of strength, walked her granddaughter down the aisle as tears fell from both their eyes, a river of joy commingled with the salt of an ever-present grief. The photographs captured their smiles, but a closer look revealed the ghost of sorrow that lived behind their eyes. She should be here, Emma whispered, as Linda took the place that rightfully belonged to her daughter in the dance. She is, my love, Linda murmured back, a sacred promise. In the sanctuary of our hearts, she is always here. 2012 brought the news of a new life. Emma was with child. The announcement dissolved them both into tears, a deluge of emotion for the future, for the coming generation. Yet Sarah would never hold this child. The cruelty of that truth was a weight too great to bear. I will tell my child all about grandmother Sarah, Emma vowed, her voice filled with fierce devotion. Every story, every memory you have gifted me. My child will know her name. She will not be forgotten. A bittersweet joy. She would have cherished this, Linda whispered, her hand a gentle benediction on Emma's belly, where her great-grandchild stirred. Oh, the happiness she would have felt. Yet, for the Martinez clan, joy was a fragile vessel, perpetually shadowed by a profound sorrow, a void in their tapestry that time could neither mend nor erase. The relentless march of years had begun to claim Linda, her own body a testament to the struggle. 30 years, a lifetime spent, chasing echoes of Sarah, a pilgrimage of unanswered calls, hollow station visits, and nights stolen by ghosts. The burden had etched itself into her very soul. And what if the truth remains forever shrouded? Emma's voice, a shard of pragmatism Linda could never quite grasp, cut through the air one afternoon. What if this emptiness, is our eternal inheritance? Then her memory becomes our sacred duty, Linda avowed, her voice a bastion of resolve. We will weave her story into the lullabies of your child. We will ensure Sarah Martinez is more than a forgotten file, a name collecting dust in some forgotten archive. She was flesh and blood. Her life had meaning, and somewhere, a soul carries the weight of that knowledge. One day, that soul will falter, and I must cling to that belief. In the year 2015, after 32 winters had passed since Sarah's disappearance, Emma brought forth a daughter. She bestowed upon her the name Sarah, a tribute to the grandmother who was but a phantom memory. The infant was a perfect echo of her namesake's portrait, a cascade of dark hair, eyes like brilliant stars, and a smile that could banish the deepest shadows. As Linda cradled her great-granddaughter, a torrent of love warred with a sea of sorrow within her. Your great-grandmother. She would have seen the sun and moon in you, she murmured against the infant's soft cheek. She would have lavished you with affection and forged you into a woman of strength and grace, a reflection of her own spirit. the seasons turned, relentless and indifferent. Linda's sanctuary for the families of the lost had offered solace to dozens over the long decades, a beacon in the fog of uncertainty. For some, the fog lifted, a case solved, a body returned, a monster caged, a chapter closed. But for too many, like Sarah's, the story remained a raw, gaping wound, refusing to heal. How do you endure? A voice, new to this particular circle of grief, asked Linda during a gathering in 2018. Linda, now a woman in her 70s, the weight of each year visible in her gaze, offered a melancholy smile. There is no choice. A mother's heart does not cease its beating simply because her child has vanished. I will champion Sarah's cause until my own breath fails. Perhaps justice will not be mine to witness, but it may yet be Emma's. Or perhaps little Sarah will one day take up this mantle. The battle does not surrender to the calendar. Then came 2020, and with it, a global plague that brought the world to its knees. In the shadow of this new, urgent crisis, the ghosts of old cases receded further into the darkness. Linda felt a chilling dread that Sarah's story would be utterly consumed, buried beneath the weight of a world in turmoil. Yet, in the quiet laboratories of forensic science, a revolution was stirring, a whisper of discovery poised to shatter the silence surrounding Sarah's fate, and hundreds of others frozen in time. A new alchemy was dawning. Genetic genealogy. It was a potent art that wove the science of DNA with the sprawling tapestries of public family trees, empowering detectives to unmask phantoms by tracing their bloodlines, even when the guilty had left no official trace. This very method had famously ensnared the spectre known as the Golden State Killer in 2018, a predator who had haunted California for decades. His capture was the breach in the dam, unleashing a torrent of hope as departments nationwide began to resurrect their coldest cases, wondering if this new science could finally illuminate the dark. When whispers of this miracle reached Linda, she seized the phone, a lifeline to the LAPD. I beg you, she pleaded, with the detective now presiding over Sarah's ghost file. Tell me this new magic can be used for her. Tell me there is a flicker of hope. Mrs. Martinez, I have been immersed in your daughter's file, replied a voice. Detective Amanda Foster's, carrying an unexpected current of optimism. The latent prints from her purse were never subjected to the full power of modern analysis. More importantly, there were minute fabric fibers on the strap, never truly tested. With genetic genealogy, should we coax a trace of DNA from those threads, we could potentially trace its owner through their own lineage. And for the first time in a lifetime of waiting, Linda felt a perilous sensation stir within her, the pulse of genuine hope. The time. How much time will it demand? She asked, her voice trembling, caught between the fear of another broken promise and a hope she could no longer contain. That is a question I cannot answer, Foster conceded with stark honesty. This pilgrimage could take months, even years, and it may yield nothing, but I give you my word, Mrs. Martinez, I will exhaust every avenue. Your daughter's memory cries out for justice, and I will strive to be its instrument. A sob tore from Linda's throat, the sound of a dam breaking. After 37 years of condescension, of being placated and pushed aside, a voice on the other end of the line was finally speaking Sarah's name with purpose. The wave of emotion crashed over Emma as well when Linda relayed the news. Is it truly possible? She whispered. After an entire lifetime has passed. I cannot say for certain, Linda replied, her voice low but steady. But it is the brightest ember of hope we have seen in decades. We are compelled to try. In the nascent months of 2021, the artifacts of Sarah's last moments were dispatched to a sanctum of forensic science. The ravaged purse, a relic preserved through the ages, was finally interrogated by technology unimaginable in 1983. And there, a secret held for nearly 4 decades, unseen by any human eye, but they're all the same, they found it, a microscopic trace of life. Not blood, but the very cells of another, shed in the brutal instant that purse was ripped from Sarah's grasp. From these ephemeral cells, the laboratory began the painstaking work of extraction. This new science could conjure a story from fragments that would have been meaningless in the 1980s. And when the story was finally told, it was the profile of a man, not Sarah. Another, the one whose hands had met that purse in violence. As 2021 drew to a close, Detective Foster's call finally came. "We have it," she said, her voice electric with barely contained excitement. "A male genetic signature, and it belongs to no one who officially handled the evidence. This could be him." A tremor seized Linda's hands. "What comes next?" she breathed. "Can you give this ghost a name?" "Here, the path becomes more intricate," Foster explained. "His profile is absent from CODIS. This man has lived his life outside the system's gaze. But now we turn to genealogy. We will cast his genetic shadow into the public databases, searching for the faintest echo of his kin, and hunt our way back to him." "How long?" Linda asked, the two words that had been the refrain of her existence for nearly 40 years. It could be months, or perhaps an eternity longer. This is where the detective's art converges with the science of ancestry. The pace is glacial, the work exacting, but Mrs. Martinez, this is no phantom hope. This is our truest path to unearthing the answers you seek. The great genealogical odyssey commenced in the early days of 2022. A specialized cartographer of bloodlines, Dr. Rebecca Chen, lent her expertise to the LAPD, uploading the spectral DNA profile to GED Match and other digital archives of human lineage. Share this chronicle with any soul captivated by the shadows of true crime, for it is here that the disparate threads of fate begin to weave a single, terrible tapestry. The profile whispered back, echoing in the genes of several distant cousins' souls who shared a fragment of a ghost song, but were too far removed to give him a name. Dr. Chen was forced to resurrect entire family trees from the dust of ages, charting the currents of birth, death, and union through public records, census data, and the sprawling digital graveyards of genealogy. It is akin to assembling a shattered mosaic from across the chasm of time, Dr. Chen illuminated for Detective Foster. We journey back through generations, mapping the vast rivers of lineage, searching for the point where they converge. From there, we seek the male descendants who walked the earth at the precise age to commit this sin in 1983. The endeavor consumed months of relentless, painstaking labor. Dr. Chen moved through a world of historical ledgers, death certificates, and marriage licenses, any artifact that could lend shape to the phantom families. She traced several promising bloodlines, then narrowed the focus by the unyielding laws of geography. Whoever this specter was, he had to have cast a shadow in Los Angeles in the August of 1983. By the midpoint of 2022, Dr. Chen's monumental work had yielded 3 possible names, 3 men who fit the temporal window, who breathed the Los Angeles air at the appointed time, and who descended from the very family lines that resonated with the spectral DNA. Detective Foster began to stalk each name with a quiet, deliberate grace, a hunter in the digital wilderness. She summoned their driving licenses, their histories of employment, any blemish on their criminal record. She watched their modern lives unfold on social media, studying their orbits, searching for any gravitational pull towards Sarah Martinez, or the geography of her final hours. 2 of the 3 shadows dissipated under the light of scrutiny. One man's presence was accounted for thousands of miles away, verifiably in Europe, on business in August of 1983. The other had met his end in a collision of steel in 1995, his own DNA captured and filed from the wreckage a code that did not match the one left on Sarah's purse. And then, there was one. His name was Bruce Thompson. In the year 2022, he was 65 years old, dwelling in a serene suburban enclave some 30 miles from where Sarah had vanished into memory. He ran a small landscaping business, had been wed for 35 years, and was the patriarch to 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren. By all appearances, he was a pillar of his community, a man who had coached Little League, who warmed a church pew, who sat on the local Chamber of Commerce. But as Detective Foster excavated the strata of his past, unsettling truths began to surface. In 1983, Bruce Thompson had been a young man of 26. He had resided in an apartment just 4 city blocks from the subway station where Sarah was last seen alive. He had earned his living as a mechanic, his hands stained with the grease of a nearby auto body shop, and he possessed a criminal record, minor trespasses, yet deeply revealing. In 1981, an arrest for petty theft. In 1982, another for assault in the crucible of a bar fight. On both occasions, fate had been kind. He had escaped with probation, paid his fines, and sidestepped any grave consequence. "This could be our ghost," Foster declared to her team. her voice low and certain. His bloodline explains the echo from the family tree. He stood in the right place at the right time. He had a history of violence and theft. Sarah's purse was taken, and she was undone. Yet, they required more than a strong current of belief. They needed a confirmation so absolute it could extinguish all doubt. They needed his DNA to sing the very same song as the sample from the purse, and they needed it in a form that would be unassailable in a court of law. Foster's team initiated a quiet vigil, their eyes fixed on Thompson. They watched him journey to work, perform his errands, visit his grandchildren. He was the very portrait of a grandfather, hair streaked with silver, a gentle swell to his belly, a ready smile. No one who gazed upon him would ever suspect he might be the keeper of a 40-year-old secret of murder. The fracture in his mundane world appeared at a coffee shop. After he departed, detectives moved in like wraiths and retrieved his discarded cup from the refuse. Upon its rim, his saliva remained a perfect, silent confession of DNA, collected without his knowledge, an entirely legal maneuver in California under such circumstances. The cup was spirited away to the laboratory. The genetic essence was drawn out and held against the profile from Sarah's purse, a ghost from 4 decades past, and the two souls spoke the same name. It was a match. A definitive, undeniable, soul-shaking match. Bruce Thompson had laid his hands upon Sarah Martinez's purse during the violent tempest that had swept her from the world. Detective Foster felt a tempest in her own heart as she stared at the results. After 40 years of silence, the ghost finally had a face. "We must proceed with the wisdom of serpents," Foster advised her lieutenant. "We have no body. We have no witnesses. We have a strand of DNA that proves Thompson touched her purse, but a skilled defense attorney could weave a tale of innocence, that he merely found it, that he intended to return it. We need more. We need his voice to tell the story." The strategy was meticulously crafted. They would approach Thompson at his sanctuary, his home, and invite him to speak about an old case. Their demeanor would be disarming, non-threatening, a gentle offering of a chance to explain. It was known that when confronted with the irrefutable ghost of their own DNA, the guilty sometimes crumble, the weight of a 40-year secret becoming a burden too great to bear, making confession a form of relief. But they had to be poised for the alternative, that he would immediately summon a lawyer, a shield that would silence him, perhaps forever, and their chance at a full confession would turn to ash. In March of 2023, at the turn of the 40th year since Sarah Martinez disappeared, Detective Foster and 2 of her colleagues sounded a knock on Bruce Thompson's door. Thompson appeared, his expression a placid mask of confusion. "May I help you?" Foster presented her badge, a small golden star against the twilight. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Foster with the LAPD Cold Case Unit. We are investigating a matter from 1983, and we would be grateful if you could join us at the station to answer some questions. It should not take a great deal of your time." A wave of pallor washed over Thompson's face. For a single fleeting heartbeat, Foster saw a flicker in his eyes, a glint of fear, of recognition, of a guilt buried for an age. And then, the mask was restored. 1983. That is a lifetime ago. What is this concerning? We would prefer to speak of it at the station, if you don't mind. You are not under arrest. You are free to depart at any moment. We simply need to clarify some old information. A shadow of hesitation crossed Thompson's face. Foster could almost hear the frantic calculus of risk and reward turning behind the man's eyes. "All right," he conceded at last. The words, a fragile truce. "I just need to let my wife know I'm stepping out." Within the station's sterile heart, Thompson was led to an interview room where the ritual of coffee and hollow small talk created a carefully constructed calm before Foster shattered the illusion. "Mr. Thompson," Foster began, his voice cutting through the quiet, "I want you to cast your mind back to August 16th, 1983. He offered a slow, deliberate shake of his head. "That's 40 years past. The specific days from so long ago have all blurred into memory. And do you recall residing near the metro station on 7th Street? "I do. I was in that neighborhood for a few years, in the early 80s. "What of it?" Foster then slid a photograph across the cold table, a ghost from a forgotten time. "Do you recognize the woman in this picture?" As Thompson's gaze fell upon the image, Foster saw it a flicker of knowing, swiftly extinguished. "No, I can't say that I do. Should I?" Her name was Sarah Martinez. She vanished on that very date, August 16th, 1983, near that same metro station. She was 23, with a 4-year-old daughter. Does none of this resonate? I already told you, I don't know her. Why are you bringing this to my door? Foster leaned forward, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. Mr. Thompson, we found your DNA on Sarah's purse, the one she carried the night she was stolen from the world. Your very essence. How do you account for that? An abyss of silence opened in the room as a tempest of emotions played across Thompson's face. Shock, then fear, then rage, all settling into the cold, hard lines of calculation. I require a lawyer, he stated, his voice devoid of the storm that had just passed. And with those words, the curtain fell. A leaden weight settled in Foster's chest. Without a confession, their case rested solely on the silent testimony of DNA strong, but not unassailable. Still, it was enough. Bruce Thompson was taken into custody, the charge echoing through the halls. The murder of Sarah Martinez. Act 3. The fracture and the aftermath. The news of the arrest ripped through Bruce Thompson's community like a tremor, shattering the facade of a man they thought they knew, the neighbor, the friend, the smiling coach. How could a soul carry such a secret for 40 years? I've known him for 20 years. One neighbor lamented to the throng of reporters. He was the kindest man. This must be some terrible mistake. Yet Detective Foster harbored no such illusions. The microscopic strands of life did not lie. Bruce Thompson stood at the precipice of Sarah Martinez's life, and now a reckoning was at hand. The call reached Linda on March 15th, 2023. At 78 years old, her body frail, she felt a sudden, impossible strength when Foster spoke the words. We arrested someone for Sarah's murder. Who? She breathed, her voice a tremor. Who did this to my child? Foster recounted the chilling details. A man named Bruce Thompson, now 65, who had woven a life of absolute normalcy while Sarah remained a ghost. The name was a void to Linda, a stranger who had simply crossed her daughter's path and laid waste to everything. Emma was at work when Linda's call came through, her grandmother's voice fractured by sobs. They have him. After 40 years, they finally have him. Emma fled her office, and soon she and her grandmother were locked in an embrace, their tears, a complex river of relief, grief, anger, and something that tasted almost like closure. Is Mom? Emma began, the question she'd carried her whole life dying on her lips. Did they find her? No, Linda's reply was a soft elegy. They do not have her body, only a trace of him on her purse. But my dear, he is arrested. He is being charged. After this long winter, we may finally see justice. Little Sarah, now 8 years old, watched them with innocent confusion. Why is everybody so sad? She asked her mother. Oh, we are not just sad, my love, Emma murmured, pulling her daughter close. We are feeling everything, but mostly, we feel a profound gratitude. Justice may finally be coming for your great-grandma Sarah. If this story of a shadow brought to light has taken hold of you, show your support, for we shall now unravel the very threads that led to this long-awaited day of judgment. A firestorm erupted in the press, the story a conflagration of headlines, a 40-year silence broken by a whisper of DNA. News channels wove a tapestry of tragedy and triumph, featuring Linda and Emma, their faces etched with decades of sorrow. They broadcast photographs of a youthful Sarah, a mother frozen in time, and chronicled the agonizing, generation-spanning quest for truth. It was a narrative forged for the public heart, a young life stolen, a family's undying grief, the cold marvel of forensic science, and an arrest that sent shockwaves through the community. For Bruce Thompson's family, the world fractured. Margaret, his wife of 35 years, was lost in a maelstrom of disbelief. Some terrible mistake has been made, she pleaded to the circle of reporters besieging their home. Bruce is incapable of harming another soul. This is a descent into madness. His children, 2 daughters and a son, now grown with lives of their own, were adrift in the same sea of shock. They had been raised under the shelter of a father who seemed an archetype of normalcy, never once glimpsing the abyss he concealed. How does one reconcile the man who taught you to ride a bicycle with the spectre now accused of silencing a young mother's voice forever? Thompson's counsel, the renowned defense attorney Richard Hayes, immediately launched a formidable counter-narrative. At a hastily called press conference, he declared his client's unassailable innocence. A trace of DNA on a purse does not weave the fabric of a murder conviction, Hayes proclaimed, his voice a bastion of certainty. My client's contact with this object could have been entirely innocuous. Perhaps he discovered it, intending its return. There exists a universe of innocent explanations. The prosecution possesses no body, no witness, no confession. Their case is a house of cards, built on the shifting sands of circumstance. But Detective Foster and the prosecution team remained unshaken. They held more than just a ghost of DNA on a leather strap. For once Thompson was in their custody, a warrant had opened the doors to his home, to his life, and what they unearthed would speak volumes. There, in the quiet dust of Thompson's garage, nestled within a box of aging papers, they discovered a collection of newspaper clippings articles detailing Sarah's vanishing in 1983. For 40 years, he had kept these morbid souvenirs. What innocent man would curate a private museum dedicated to a missing woman he swore he never knew? His old work record sang a damning chorus. In the August of 1983, Thompson had been employed at an auto body shop, a mere 3 blocks from the very spot where Sarah's world had dissolved. His shift had concluded at 5 in the evening on August the 16th, a time that tragically coincided with Sarah's desperate search for her lost pass at the subway station. And here, the narrative took a darker turn. Thompson had abandoned that job with startling abruptness on August the 18th, just 2 days after Sarah disappeared. He offered no notice, only a phantom call declaring he would not return. A week later, he had vanished from his apartment, replanting his life in another corner of the city, as if fleeing a ghost. This is what we call a consciousness of guilt, District Attorney Michael Rodriguez explained, his voice grim as he briefed Linda and Emma before the trial. He was running from the echo of his own actions. He tore down his entire life to evade the shadow of suspicion. Yet the final, damning verse of this tragic poem, the evidence that would seal Thompson's fate, was to be drawn from a most unexpected well. Do you recall the faint, old fingerprints from Sarah's purse, the ones that had long defied analysis? Through the lens of modern technology, forensic artisans gazed upon them anew, and they uncovered a secret the investigators of 1983 had overlooked. A partial palm print, impressed upon the purse's inner lining, directly on Sarah's wallet. They laid that spectral palm print against the fresh ink of Bruce Thompson's, now catalogued from his arrest. It was a perfect match, not merely his essence on the purse's exterior, but the undeniable press of his palm upon her wallet, deep inside. Thompson had plunged his hand into the heart of her belongings, touching the very wallet that had been bled dry of the $12 Sarah had carried. This shatters any claim of innocent contact, DA Rodriguez declared, the pieces clicking into a terrible, coherent whole. He didn't just stumble upon her purse. He violated it. He robbed her. His hand was inside, taking her money. And Sarah Martinez fought him. That is how his DNA was left upon the strap. She fought for her life, and for that, he authored her end. The case was a mosaic, slowly, painstakingly assembled. But a gaping void remained at its center, the absence of Sarah's body. Without her, the defense could conjure a storm of doubt, arguing there was no proof Sarah was even gone, let alone that Thompson was the one who had taken her. Detective Foster found herself haunted, obsessed with bringing Sarah home. She pored over maps of the city as it was then, a ghost of a landscape, tracing the orbits of Thompson's life and work, trying to inhabit the mind of a frantic killer desperate to erase his sin. He was without a car in those days, Foster mused to her team during one of countless late-night sessions. His records confirm he rode the bus to that mechanic's job. He couldn't have transported her to some distant, forgotten place. Whatever he did, wherever she is, it had to be close. It had to be on foot. Their search became a grim pilgrimage through the city's memory. They scrutinized construction sites from 1983, foundations where a secret could be interred. They walked through parks and vacant lots, any forgotten space Thompson could have reached. They even summoned cadaver dogs, whose mournful search cast long shadows around his former apartment building. But 40 years is an eternity. The city had devoured itself and been reborn. Buildings that had stood in 1983 were now dust. Empty lots had bloomed into strip malls. The very geography of memory had been erased. Still, Foster refused to yield. She sought out the ghosts of Thompson's past old colleagues, neighbors from a life he'd abandoned. Most memories were thin, faded. He was a quiet one, a former co-worker recalled, kept to himself, just did his job, and disappeared at the end of the day. But one voice, belonging to an elderly woman named Dorothy Walsh, offered a flicker in the dark. "I remember an old abandoned warehouse, just a block or so from our building," she said, her words dredging up a forgotten landmark. "It was slated for demolition, but it just sat there, empty, for a couple of years. Sometimes, the homeless would shelter inside. I remember Bruce used to cut through that property, a shortcut home from the bus. My husband always warned me away from there, said it was an unsafe place." A current surged through Foster's veins. "The address," she pressed. "Can you remember the address?" Dorothy could. Foster's fingers flew across the keyboard, chasing the ghost of a location. The warehouse had been razed in 1985, replaced by a concrete parking structure. But before the demolition, before the earth was scraped clean, had anyone ever truly searched its shadowed depths? Foster resurrected the cold case files, her eyes scanning the brittle pages. In 1983, the police had canvassed the area, yes, but their theory was anchored to a vehicle. They had searched for places a car could go, not where a man on foot, burdened by a terrible secret, might seek refuge. That warehouse had never been properly examined. The parking structure that now occupied the space was a 4-story monument to urban progress, erected in 1985. If Sarah's body had been concealed within that warehouse when the demolition crews arrived, she could be entombed in the very foundation of the new structure. "We need ground-penetrating radar," Foster stated to her lieutenant, her voice imbued with a chilling certainty. "We have to scan the foundation of that garage. It's possible Sarah Martinez is right there, resting beneath 40 years of solid concrete." Securing permission to perform a GPR scan on a public structure was a labyrinth of bureaucracy. The city held the deed, and the search would mean closing sections of the garage for days, perhaps longer. The cost was a formidable barrier, and there was no promise of what, if anything, they would find. But D.A. Rodriguez became their champion. "We have a debt to Sarah Martinez, and to the family that has waited a lifetime for answers," he argued before city officials. "Our case against Thompson is strong, but without her, the defense will sow seeds of reasonable doubt. If there is even a sliver of a chance that Sarah lies there, we are obligated to look." And so, in June of 2023, 3 months after Thompson's arrest, a forensic team assembled their ground-penetrating radar. They began their solemn work at the parking structure, scanning the cold ground methodically, section by silent section, listening for any anomaly in the foundation, any whisper from below that might speak of human remains. On the second day, as the radar slid over a corner of the ground-level foundation, a discordant note appeared on the screen. It showed a disturbance, an echo from the deep, something whose density did not belong amid the uniform embrace of the concrete. "It could be a phantom," the technician warned, his voice a low hum. "A hollow space, a tangle of steel, the rubble of forgotten days. But something rests there, demanding a closer look." To breach that concrete tomb was a monumental task, a delicate surgery upon the earth itself. Every drill, every scoop of debris, was a prayer against destroying the truth they sought. On the periphery, forensic anthropologists waited, silent sentinels prepared to read the story written in bone. For 3 agonizing days, the world held its breath. Cameras became unblinking eyes, broadcasting the slow, sacred unearthing, layer by painstaking layer. From the sanctuary of their home, Linda and Emma bore witness on a screen, their hearts too fragile to stand at the edge of that gaping wound in the ground. And then, as the 3rd day bled into twilight, a silence fell. They had found her. A fragile skeleton, shrouded in the ghost of a tarp, lay in the forgotten cellar of a warehouse, long since turned to dust. The concrete, a cold and final blanket, had been poured directly over her, sealing Sarah Martinez in a timeless darkness for nearly 40 years as the world spun on, oblivious, just feet above her head. Leave a 1 in the comments if this story has taken hold of you, for this is the fulcrum upon which the entire world of this case now turns. With the reverence of archaeologists, they lifted her from the earth. In the quiet of the medical examiner's office, dental records merely voiced the truth already echoing in every heart. It was Sarah Martinez. After 4 decades adrift in shadow, she was, at long last, coming home. The coroner's report was a testament to a final, desperate battle. Her very bones bore the scars of a furious assault, a constellation of at least 23 separate wounds from a blade, A catastrophic blow to her skull spoke of the final, violent crescendo. Her passing was recorded in stark terms, a litany of blade wounds and cranial trauma. She fought, the medical examiner offered in a hushed, private epitaph to Detective Foster. The marks on her hands, her arms, they are the final record of a woman who fought for every last breath. For Linda and Emma, the truth arrived as a devastating solace. The 40-year torment of the unknown, a far crueler phantom, was finally laid to rest. Now they knew. Sarah had not vanished. She had not forsaken her child. She had been stolen by a nameless violence, her body cast into darkness, while her name became a question that haunted her family for a lifetime. The unearthing of Sarah's remains was the stone that shattered the defense's fragile glass house. Suddenly, the prosecution held a victim, a cause of death, and the irrefutable thread of DNA weaving Thompson into the fabric of the crime itself. The flimsy narrative of innocent contact dissolved into mist. District Attorney Rodriguez leveled the full weight of the law, charging Thompson with murder in the first degree, shadowed by the special circumstance of a life taken in the act of a robbery. In California, such a charge carried the sentence of a life eclipsed, never to see the world outside of stone and steel. An offer was placed on the table, a bargain for the truth, a life behind bars in exchange for a full confession. But Thompson refused. Even as the walls of evidence closed in, he clung to a defiant declaration of innocence. "I am not the man you seek," he insisted to his own counsel, his voice a rasp of denial. "Let the science say what it will. I did not extinguish that girl's light." But the evidence whispered a different, darker story. And as investigators delved deeper into the archaeology of Thompson's past, they began to unearth other ghosts. In 1977, 6 years before Sarah's final walk, a shadow fell near that very same subway station. A woman was assaulted, robbed, and left beaten but breathing. Her description of the attacker was a chilling echo of Thompson, but doubt allowed him to slip back into the darkness. A charge never filed. Then, in 1981, the pattern repeated. Another woman reported being stalked from the station's mouth by a man who wore Thompson's face. She found sanctuary in the light of a crowded shop, and her pursuer vanished like a phantom. "He was a hunter," Detective Foster declared, her words cutting through the media clamor. This was his ground, and Sarah Martinez was his victim. We believe other stories remain untold. We are calling out to the past, to anyone who was menaced near that station in the late 1970s or early 80s. It is time for your voices to be heard, and from the quiet depths of decades, voices began to answer. Women stepped out of the shadows, their stories a chilling chorus that matched Thompson's predatory rhythm. Fear had silenced them then, but now, after a lifetime, they demanded their truth be known. Among them was Jennifer Morrison, whose story was a harrowing prelude. In the heavy air of July 1983, a mere month before Sarah was lost, Jennifer was accosted at that same station. A hand seized her purse, but she fought back. A blade flashed. Her scream shattered the evening, and as help ran toward her, the man fled into the night. "I went to the authorities," Jennifer recounted, tears that had waited decades finally falling. "They called it a common crime, a ghost they'd never catch. When I heard about Sarah Martinez, about her purse, torn and empty, a cold dread took root in my soul. I always wondered. Now, I know." In September of 2023, the final act began. The trial of Bruce Thompson convened in a courtroom that strained at the seams, a theater of justice packed daily with a public who had followed this long, dark road and now demanded to see its end. Every day, Linda held vigil in the front row, Emma her anchor, and at times, little Sarah, a living legacy. They were a silent, unwavering testament, forcing Thompson to gaze upon the ruins of the family he had fractured, the generations he had scarred. Across the room, Thompson sat entombed at the defense table, a man of 65 years who looked a century old, the gravity of his hidden life finally collapsing him inward. His own family was absent, a conspicuous void, unable to bridge the chasm between the man they had loved and the monster on earth. The prosecution's case was a masterwork of devastation. They laid each piece of the mosaic before the jury. The immutable truth of DNA, the ghostly impression of a palm, the scrapbook of clippings kept like trophies. They drew a timeline of flight, a job abandoned, a life uprooted, and then they gave voice to the ghosts of his past, the women who had survived him. When the medical examiner took the stand, the air grew thin. He spoke of Sarah's final moments in the cold, precise language of science, a clinical recitation of unspeakable violence. For Linda, it was a torment beyond endurance. She fled the courtroom, unable to hear the last brutal chapter of her daughter's life read aloud. Share in the comments the state from which you bear witness, and tell me, has a story ever held you in its grip quite like this one? Dr. Rebecca Chen, the genetic genealogist, then took the stand, translating the arcane science of ancestry into a compelling narrative. She showed them how the future had finally come to reckon with a 40-year-old sin. Detective Foster recounted the long, barren decades of the investigation, a desert of dead ends, until the sudden breakthrough. She did not speak only of evidence. She showed them photographs of a smiling Sarah holding her baby girl, reminding the jury that this was never just a file, but a daughter, a mother, a future stolen in the dark. Then, the prosecution summoned a ghost into the courtroom, the frantic, terrified voice of Linda from the 911 call, a sound preserved in time. They followed it with a silent, heartbreaking procession of Emma's childhood photos, a little girl at every milestone, with an aching void where her mother should have been. Sarah Martinez was a soul of 23 years. D.A. Rodriguez's voice filled the silent courtroom. A young mother, toiling at 2 jobs to weave a better world for her daughter. She held a future, a tapestry of dreams and plans. And on the 16th of August, 1983, Bruce Thompson tore that tapestry to shreds. He plundered her, extinguished her life, and concealed her earthly form. Then, for 4 decades, he walked free, while Sarah's family was imprisoned in sorrow. The evidence will cry out, beyond the shadow of any doubt, that Bruce Thompson is guilty of this ultimate sin. The defense, in turn, attempted to sow seeds of doubt in the barren ground of possibility. Richard Hayes spun a tale of innocent contact, perhaps. Thompson had merely found the purse, his DNA a fleeting mark left while searching for an owner. Perhaps he was a would-be Samaritan who, upon glimpsing the darkness of the truth, took flight in fear. But the story rang hollow, a discordant note in the symphony of evidence. The ghost of his palm print inside the wallet, the proof of his robbery, could not be exorcised by a tale of innocence. The newspaper clippings, hoarded like trophies, his sudden vanishing, the chilling pattern of his predation, it all painted a masterpiece of guilt. In a desperate gambit, Hayes placed Thompson himself upon the stand. He professed his innocence, a man lost in the fog of a forgotten past, claiming no memory of Sarah Martinez, offering no explanation for the scientific specter of his DNA. "Perhaps I found the purse," Thompson whispered, his voice a fragile tremor. "Perhaps I intended its return, but a wave of fear washed over me, and I let it fall. I cannot recall. It was 40 years ago, a lifetime. Then why?" Rodriguez's question cut like a shard of glass. "Did you keep the chronicles of her disappearance?" I do not know. Perhaps the case held a certain fascination for me. You were fascinated by the case of a woman whose face, whose name, you claim is lost to your memory. I suppose it must be so. And was it mere coincidence that you abandoned your job just 2 days after she vanished from the earth? That work had lost its appeal. I desired a change of scenery. And your apartment, forsaken a week later? Another stroke of coincidence. I had discovered a more suitable place to live. Rodriguez paused, letting the suffocating absurdity of Thompson's narrative hang in the air. Then, he produced the photographs of Sarah's final brutal struggle. "Mr. Thompson, a blade found Sarah Martinez 23 times. Her hands and arms bore the testament of her desperate fight for life. The medical examiner confirmed she battled to her very last breath. And you asked this jury to believe you are a stranger to this unspeakable act." Thompson's face was a mask of crimson, beaded with sweat. "I did not do it. I did not take her life. Your very essence is on her purse. Your palm is branded upon her wallet. Your pattern of stalking women near that station is a documented history. You collected the stories of her vanishing. You fled your life the moment hers was ended, and her body was unearthed in the shadow of where you once lived. Is all of this, Mr. Thompson, merely coincidence?" "I did not do it," Thompson repeated. But the words were hollow shells, devoid of conviction. The jury remained sequestered for less than 6 hours. When they returned, a funereal silence descended, pierced only by the sound of Linda's quiet, ceaseless weeping. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Bruce Thompson, guilty of murder in the first degree with special circumstances. The courtroom shattered into a storm of emotion. Linda collapsed into Emma's arms, the dam of 40 years of grief, rage, and agonizing hope finally breaking, flowing into a river that led, at last, to a semblance of peace. Emma wept, holding her grandmother, her thoughts on a mother she barely knew, finally avenged. Thompson remained an island of stillness, his face a blank canvas, his eyes staring into nothingness, as if this final reckoning was a dream from which he had yet to wake. At the sentencing 2 weeks later, the court gave voice to the wounded. Linda rose first to speak. "I lost my daughter 40 years ago," she said, her voice a column of iron. "But I never, for one moment, stopped fighting for her. Sarah was a brilliant, gentle, and relentless young woman who loved her daughter beyond the measure of this world. Bruce Thompson tore her from our lives. He tore her from Emma, from every soul that loved her. He stole 4 decades from our family, 40 years of an endless vigil, of grieving a ghost without a grave." Linda's eyes locked with Thompson's. "You are a coward. You took the life of a young mother, hid her away, and lived as though she were nothing, but she was everything. Sarah mattered. And now, the world will forever know you for what you are." Emma spoke next, a photograph of Sarah, her only shield. "I was 4 years old when my mother's world went dark. I am left with only fragments, the echo of her laugh, the scent of her hair, the absolute safety of her embrace. I had to grow up in her absence. Every milestone, every graduation, my wedding day, the birth of my own daughter, was marked by the ghost of her presence. Bruce Thompson did not just end my mother's life. He stole my childhood, my chance to know her, and her chance to know her own grandchild." Emma's voice broke, a fragile thing. "But my mother's memory endures. It lives in my grandmother, who never surrendered. It lives in me. It lives in my daughter, who carries her name. Sarah Martinez was loved, and she will be remembered for all of time." Even men who had once called Thompson friend spoke, their voices heavy with the weight of betrayal. "I thought I knew him," one man lamented. "But now I see, I never knew him at all." The judge passed sentence, his words like the tolling of a final bell. Bruce Thompson would spend his life in prison without the possibility of parole. "You showed no mercy to Sarah Martinez," the judge intoned. "You will receive none from this court." As Thompson was led away in chains, a feeling Linda hadn't known in 40 years settled in her soul. Closure. It was not happiness. How could it be? Sarah was still an echo in a silent room. But it was a resolution, the final word in a tragic story that had consumed her entire adult life. Let your voices echo in the comments. Tell me which tale of shadows you wish for me to unfurl. Next, I cherish the chorus of your thoughts. With the final gavel's fall, Sarah's long scattered essence was at last gathered for its final slumber. Linda orchestrated a farewell of profound magnitude, a vast congregation of souls, hundreds strong, drawn together by love and the long shadow of this case. Kin, companions, silent observers of the protracted drama, the tireless sentinels of justice, who pursued her phantom through the decades, and even the kindred spirits, women who had survived Thompson's shadow, all came to consecrate her memory. "My mother has come home at last," Emma's voice resonated through the hallowed silence of the eulogy. "After 40 years adrift in the wilderness, she has found her harbor, and the architect of her darkness will fade into oblivion within prison walls, forever haunted by the relentless ghost of justice." Linda, a sentinel of 80 years, stood before the newly turned soil of Sarah's grave, her hands placing blossoms upon the earth. 4 decades of relentless battle had culminated in this solemn peace. "I honored my vow," she breathed, a whisper meant only for the one below. "I never abandoned you, my child, not for a single moment." An epilogue in shadow and light. The saga of Sarah Martinez is a tapestry woven with threads of tragedy, yet illuminated by the unyielding fiber of persistence and the eventual, radiant triumph of justice, though it tarried for 40 years. Her memory serves as a stark testament that no case is ever truly cold, merely dormant, awaiting the whisper of new science, the gaze of a new guardian, the perfect alignment of fate to finally break its silence. Within the shadowed narrative of Sarah's fate lie profound truths, stark warnings, etched for our own preservation. It is not my aim to sermonize, nor to cast a pall of fear, but the wisdom gleaned from her sacrifice is of a vital, urgent nature. First, you must heed the silent alarm of your intuition. If the air of a moment feels dissonant, it is a portent of discord. Sarah, besieged by the mundane anxiety of a lost past, was likely adrift in distraction, her senses dulled to the encroaching peril. In moments of inner turmoil, when our focus is narrowed by a single problem, our defenses crumble. Remain anchored to the present, a vigilant sentinel of your own existence, especially amidst the anonymous currents of the crowd. Second, cast a lifeline to those who hold you dear. Let your path be known. Sarah's family held a map of her intentions from work to diner, but a crucial deviation went unrecorded. In those fleeting, pivotal moments, she was a ghost on the landscape. Weave a thread of your journey for another to hold. Announce your destinations, signal your arrivals, and if you can bear it, allow technology to be the silent guardian of your whereabouts. Third, when you witness a transgression, you must give it a voice. Many other women had felt the chill of Bruce Thompson's shadow before he extinguished Sarah's light. Some cried out into the void, others suffered in silence, and the cries that were heard were dismissed as mere echoes. If you are ever touched by such menace, be it assault, harassment, or a whispered threat, you must sound the alarm. Your single testimony, which may feel like a solitary whisper, could be the very note that completes a damning symphony, exposing the beast in the dark. Fourth, you must never fear shattering the placid surface of civility. Sarah waged a war for her existence. The harrowing testament was written upon her very skin. She fought for every breath. If danger's claws ever find you, unleash a tempest. Scream, claw, flee into the arms of the crowd. Do whatever is commanded by the primal will to survive. Far better to bear the fleeting blush of a false alarm than to be silenced forever by a misplaced sense of decorum. And to those who watch and wait for the lost to return, let this be your creed. Never surrender hope. For 40 years, Linda Martinez was a warrior against the encroaching silence, a tireless petitioner for truth, refusing to let Sarah's name fade into memory. That sacred persistence, that holy refusal to concede, was the very force that summoned justice from the abyss. The one you seek is worthy of such a crusade. Haunt the halls of inquiry. Let your voice be a constant echo and keep their flame alive in the public heart. Dormant cases awaken, but only when roused by the unwavering. In truth, Sarah's chronicle is a testament to the miraculous power of forensic alchemy. The science of DNA, a phantom concept in 1983, reached across 4 decades to unmask her killer. Genetic genealogy, a discipline once relegated to the pages of fantasy, summoned Bruce Thompson from the shadows to face his reckoning. Thousands of silent files lie in wait, holding the ghosts of the unresolved, each a potential story of redemption through these new arts. Thousands of families poised on the precipice of peace. The final chapter in Sarah's case cannot unwrite the volumes of sorrow her family was forced to endure. It does not resurrect her, nor does it restore to Emma the stolen tapestry of a childhood with her mother, or grant young Sarah the gift of her great-grandmother's wisdom. But it does offer a solemn closure, a final, resonant chord. It declares to her kin and to the listening world that her life was a light of consequence, that the scales of justice, however slow, will always find their balance, and that even the deepest shadows cannot conceal a monster indefinitely. For 4 decades, Bruce Thompson walked the earth under the delusion of his escape. He constructed a facade of a life, a family, a place of honor in his community, all built upon a foundation of concrete and secrets, under which Sarah's dreams lay buried, while her family drowned in anguish. Yet in the final act, the specter of justice found him. The indelible sins he left behind, a microscopic whisper of his own essence, the faint ghost of a palm on leather, the damning echoes of his own guilt, conspired to orchestrate his ruin. In the present day, Emma nurtures her own daughter, Sarah, weaving for her the legend of the grandmother she would never embrace. Young Sarah understands she bears the name of a spirit, both luminous and valiant, a woman of tireless industry and boundless love, who was owed a destiny far grander than the one she was dealt. And Linda, in the twilight of her 80 years, has at last found a quiet solace, knowing the author of her daughter's tragedy is caged in the darkness he deserves. The haunting case of Sarah Martinez serves as a solemn incantation, reminding us that each dormant file holds a living heart, a fractured family, and a sorrow that time cannot erode. It is a testament that the march of invention can deliver retribution from across the chasm of decades, and it reaffirms the sacred power of persistence, that a family's undying vigil and an investigator's relentless pursuit can thaw the most frozen chambers of the past. She was but 23 summers old, Sarah Martinez, when she was swallowed by the heat of 1983. She was a constellation of roles: a mother, a daughter, a confidant, a striver with a universe of dreams unfolding before her. She was owed the symphony of a life so brutally silenced. Her family was owed a truth that remained buried for 40 agonizing years. But in the fullness of time, the scales were balanced. And as for Bruce Thompson, the man who believed his monstrous secret was safe in the crypt of the past, he was delivered a final, chilling lesson. Justice knows no expiration. The silent evidence he abandoned, a patient ghost, simply waited for science to give it a voice. And when it finally spoke, its testimony was more absolute than any human tongue could ever be. If you have journeyed with me to the end of this somber tale, I ask this of you: become a keeper of these stories by subscribing and sound the bell of notification so that you may not miss the next chapter. Let your thoughts cascade in the comments below. Tell me what chronicle of darkness you wish to explore, or share the impressions Sarah's story has left upon your soul. Share this testament with all who are drawn to the labyrinth of true crime and who believe that for every soul wronged, justice must find its dawn, however long the night. May you find serene repose, Sarah Martinez. Your family's unwavering faith was your beacon, justice was your final homecoming, and your story, now told, will stand as your eternal monument. Certain elements have been rendered through a dramatic lens and identities cloaked to preserve the sanctity of privacy. Yet the heart of this narrative beats with the truth of real events, a tragedy that fractured a community's soul and proved that no matter the years that fall away like leaves, the truth will always fight its way to the surface. Until our paths cross again in the shadows, guard your light, heed the whispers of your intuition, and remember this: the stride of justice may be measured and slow, but its gaze is eternal and unblinking.